The text message glowed in the dim Stockholm hotel room, its cheerful cruelty a stark contrast to the 7 a.m. gloom. "You should have seen your face, snoring away while I made my great escape. Priceless." Lucas Thorne, a 34-year-old structural engineer from Portland, Oregon, stared at the screen, the words not quite computing. The space beside him in the king-size bed was cold and empty. He'd chalked her absence up to an early trip to the hotel gym, a rare moment of discipline from his wife Chloe. But then he saw it. The absence. Her oversized suitcase, a garish lime green thing that had dominated the room's elegance, was gone. The bathroom counter, once cluttered with an array of expensive serums, moisturizers, and perfumes, was wiped clean. The only thing she'd left behind was him and a cold, tightening knot in the pit of his stomach that was rapidly spreading into his chest. He called the front desk, his voice rough with sleep and dawning panic. "Good morning, Hotel Nordica? This is Henrik. How may I assist you?" The clerk's English was flawless, his tone measured and calm, the very essence of Swedish composure. "Yes, hi, this is Lucas Thorne in room 1204. My wife seems to be missing. Chloe Thorne, have you seen her this morning?" There was a brief pause, the soft clatter of a keyboard. Yes, Mr. Thorne. Mrs. Thorne checked out at approximately 3:17 a.m. She took our complimentary airport shuttle. She mentioned you had, different departure arrangements." "Different arrangements?" Lucas echoed, his mind reeling. "No, that's not right. We're on the same flight, tonight at 6 p.m. to Seattle via Reykjavik." "I am only relaying the information she provided, sir," his voice politely neutral. Lucas ended the call and fumbled for his phone, pulling up the airline's app. Their confirmation was there. 2 passengers, ARN 12, ARN 13, SeaTac 1800. Relief, hot and fleeting, washed over him. She was just messing with him. This was an elaborate, deeply unfunny prank. She'd probably just gone to a different hotel for the day to make him sweat. But a gnawing doubt made him call the airline directly. After navigating an automated menu and holding for 15 minutes, a cheerful agent named Brenda came on the line. "I just want to confirm our seats for Flight 452 to Seattle tonight," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "Certainly, Mr. Thorne. Let me pull that up for you." She heard more typing. "Okay, I see the reservation, but there's been a change. Your departure has been moved to next Wednesday. Mrs. Thorne is currently en route to Chicago on Flight 118, which departed at 6 a.m. this morning. She called yesterday afternoon to modify the bookings." The world tilted. The hotel room, with its tasteful Scandinavian furniture and view of the rooftops of Södermalm, seemed to shrink and distort. Next Wednesday? 5 days from now? She moved my flight without telling me? It appears so, sir. The reservation is under her name, so she had full authority to make changes. Would you like me to explain the rebooking options? He mumbled something and hung up. He sat on the edge of the disheveled bed, the fine Egyptian cotton sheets feeling like sandpaper against his skin. He read her text again. Priceless! She thought this was funny. She thought planning her escape while he slept was a stroke of comedic genius. She thought leaving him stranded, alone, in a foreign country with no warning and a useless return ticket was a hilarious capstone to their vacation. The terrible thing was, this wasn't entirely unprecedented. Chloe had always worn the badge of spontaneity. 2 years ago, she'd surprised him by adopting a high-energy border collie mix from a shelter, despite his allergies and their apartment's no-pets policy. The dog, aptly named Chaos, had been rehomed after 3 destructive months. Last year, she'd maxed out his credit card on a can't-miss investment opportunity. A vanload of artisanal kombucha brewing equipment that now gathered dust in their storage locker. He'd forgiven her each time, chalking it up to her vibrant, unpredictable spirit that had, initially, been so magnetic. But this was different. This was malicious. This was cruel. Feeling numb, he showered and dressed, moving on autopilot. He needed to figure out his next move. The U.S. Embassy wouldn't open until 9. He could try to change his flight, but the last-minute cost would be astronomical. He imagined Chloe, already airborne, sipping a mimosa and giggling with a flight attendant about her brilliant midnight escape. The thought made his stomach churn. He descended to the sleek, minimalist lobby, the calm efficiency of the staff a sharp contrast to the turmoil raging inside him. He approached the front desk, where a different clerk, a young woman with severe blonde hair and kind eyes, listened to his story. "I need to change my room, and I need the number for the American Embassy. My wife, she left. She took all our money." It was a simplification, but it captured the utter powerlessness he felt. The clerk's professional smile faded into genuine sympathy. "Of course, sir, I am so sorry to hear this. Let me see what we can do." As she typed, Lucas became aware of someone standing nearby. A woman, roughly his age, was checking in. She had a no-nonsense blonde ponytail and wore practical, comfortable clothing: dark trousers, a wool sweater, sturdy boots. Her rolling suitcase was a functional, scuffed black model covered in a collage of faded travel stickers from places like Svalbard, Tromsø, and the Faroe Islands. A well-worn leather laptop bag was slung over her shoulder. She finished her transaction and turned, her blue eyes briefly meeting his. There was a quiet competence in her gaze, a steadiness that felt like an anchor in his hurricane. Something in his chest, a tension he hadn't even acknowledged, loosened just a fraction. He had a sudden, inexplicable certainty that this woman would never find abandoning someone in a foreign country priceless. He'd known Chloe since their sophomore year at university. They'd been paired as lab partners in a brutal organic chemistry class. She was everything he wasn't: impulsive, dazzlingly social, utterly fearless. Where he planned his study schedule in color-coded binders, she crammed the night before and aced the tests through sheer, brilliant instinct. He was drawn to her chaos like a moth to a flame. For 7 years, he told himself their differences balanced each other out. Her spontaneity loosened him up, his stability gave her a safe harbor. They'd married 2 years ago in a ceremony she planned in a whirlwind 3 weeks after declaring their original, sensible 1-year engagement plan a soul-crushing exercise in corporate event planning. Lately, though, her spontaneity had begun to feel less like fun and more like a series of escalating emergencies he was expected to manage. The dog, the kombucha catastrophe, the time she'd volunteered their apartment for a friend's wedding reception with 12 hours' notice. This trip to Sweden had been his idea, his meticulously planned dream. He'd saved for 2 years, researching historical sites, booking tours to specific architectural marvels, making reservations at renowned restaurants. Chloe had seemed excited, though she kept joking about adding some real adventure and shaking the itinerary up. He should have listened to the warning in her words. The woman from the lobby approached him. "Excuse me," she said, her English accented with the same melodic Swedish lilt as the hotel staff. "I couldn't help overhear. You are having some trouble." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "You could say that. My wife decided to go home early. A lot early. And she took my ticket with her." The woman's expression didn't flicker towards amusement or judgment. It settled into something more profound: concern. "That is a terrible thing to do," she said simply. "You must feel completely abandoned." The word was a punch to the gut. Abandoned. He'd been mentally using stranded, left, ditched. But abandoned was the right word. It carried the weight of betrayal, of a fundamental dereliction of duty, of care. This wasn't a prank. It was a profound failure of partnership. "Yeah,"
he managed to say, his voice thick. That's exactly it. She introduced herself as Annika Lindström. She was a marine geologist from Gothenburg, in Stockholm for a 3-day conference on sustainable deep-sea mining. When he explained his situation in more detail, she didn't offer empty platitudes. She offered solutions. "The embassy is not far from here," she said, pulling out her phone. "I can show you the best tunnelbana route. The Tesscentralt station is just a 5-minute walk. And if you would like," she hesitated, "I could accompany you. Sometimes these bureaucratic things are less daunting with moral support." He was overwhelmed. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." She gave a small shrug. "There is a concept we have here, lagom. It does not translate perfectly, but it means balance, fairness, enough. What your wife did was not lagom. It was deeply unfair. When something is unbalanced, it is right to help restore the balance." She offered a faint smile. "Also, it is just being a decent human being." Over coffee in the hotel's cafe, while they waited for the embassy to open, she told him about her work, mapping the seabed to understand the impact of resource extraction. She listened, truly listened, as he talked about his engineering projects, about the challenges of designing structures to withstand seismic activity. She asked thoughtful questions and didn't once interrupt to steer the conversation back to herself. It struck him that it had been months, maybe years, since he'd had a conversation with Chloe that wasn't ultimately about her ideas, her dramas, her next big thing. By the 3rd day, Chloe's texts had evolved. The gleeful bragging had given way to puzzled concern, which quickly curdled into irritation. "Lucas, hello, you're not actually mad, are you? It was a joke." "Okay, the silent treatment is getting dramatic. Lighten up." "Seriously? You're going to ruin this whole funny story because you can't take a joke?" He was walking through the winding streets of Gamla stan with Annika, who had insisted on playing tour guide. "You have seen the tourist Stockholm," she said. "Now let me show you the real one." She pointed out the subtle runes carved into a doorway, the meaning behind the specific shade of fallen red on a building, the history of a tiny courtyard that wasn't in any guidebook.
They stopped at a small, steamy cafe tucked down an alleyway. The moment they entered, an elderly man behind the counter looked up and broke into a wide smile. "Annika, välkommen tillbaka." He came around and embraced her, then brought 2 cups of strong coffee and 2 cinnamon buns to their table without taking an order. "You're a regular," Lucas observed. "My grandfather," she said, nodding toward the man. "I spent my childhood summers here, learning to make coffee and listening to his stories." There was a deep, warm sense of continuity in her voice, of roots that ran deep, and of chosen kindness. It made him think of his own family, of his sister back in Portland, and how Chloe always seemed to have a reason why visiting her was complicated. That night, he called his oldest friend, Mark, back in Portland. "What she did?" Mark's voice was a mixture of disbelief and anger. "Lucas, that's not spontaneous. That's pathological. Who does that?" The word landed with even more force than Annika's abandoned. Pathological, it suggested something broken, something sick, not just thoughtless or selfish. "She's texting me nonstop, getting angrier that I'm not playing along." "Because it wasn't a joke, man," Mark said, his voice grim. "Jokes make everyone laugh. This was her laughing at you. This was a power move. This was something else entirely." After he hung up, Lucas looked out his hotel window at the lights of Stockholm reflecting on the water. The city felt peaceful and solid. Annika had invited him to dinner the next night with some of her colleagues from the conference. She'd mentioned it casually, as if incorporating a stranded American into her professional life was the most natural thing in the world. He thought about the generosity of that invitation compared to Chloe's cruel abandonment. One was offered freely, the other was taken, calculated for maximum shock value.
He picked up his phone, scrolled through Chloe's increasingly frantic messages, and then did something he hadn't done in years. He turned it off. For the first time in 3 days, he slept through the night. On the 4th day, he decided to test a theory. He turned his phone back on. 23 messages from Chloe cascaded down the screen, escalating from playful to demanding to genuinely worried. The latest, sent at 2 a.m. Stockholm time, read, "Lucas, this isn't funny anymore. Call me." He typed back a simple, neutral response. "Having dinner with a friend tonight. Talk later." The reply was instantaneous. "What friend? You don't know anyone in Stockholm." He stared at the message. She was right. He hadn't known anyone. But her assumption that he was incapable of making a connection, that he was so inherently uninteresting that no one would want to spend time with him, revealed more about her perception of him than he ever wanted to admit. The dinner was at a modern Swedish restaurant in Södermalm, a place Annika's colleagues had chosen. The conversation was a warm, lively mix of English and Swedish. When he admitted confusion over a cultural reference, everyone was eager to explain without a hint of condescension. Dr. Bengtsson, a senior researcher with a kind face, asked detailed questions about engineering challenges in cold climates. Dr. Nilsson, a sharp-eyed woman studying sediment pollution, wanted to know about Pacific Northwest environmental policies. Annika sat beside him, softly translating the occasional rapid Swedish, her presence a steadying force. "And your wife?" Dr. Bengtsson asked during a lull. "She was not interested to join us?" The table fell silent for a moment before Dr. Nielsen muttered something in Swedish that made the others nod in grim agreement. Annika later translated it for him. "Some people's idea of fun is other people's emergency." "She had other priorities," Lucas said quietly. Later, as Annika walked him back to his hotel through the cool, lingering twilight, she said, "Your friends are wonderful." "They liked you," she replied. "You listen, you ask good questions. You are not just waiting for your turn to talk." They paused on a bridge overlooking the water, the city lights dancing on the surface. "Can I ask you something?" Annika said, her voice gentle. "When you talk about your marriage, you always describe what your wife does, the things she plans, the surprises she creates. You never talk about what you do together, what you build together." The observation was like a surgeon's knife, precise in revealing a truth he'd been avoiding. She was right. His role had been reduced to that of a supporting character, reacting, accommodating, cleaning up, financing. He couldn't remember the last mutual decision they'd made that wasn't ultimately about facilitating one of Chloe's whims. "We used to," he said, the defense sounding weak even to his own ears. When he really thought about it, he realized it was probably back in college. Annika was quiet for a moment. "In my field," she said, gazing at the dark water, "when an ecosystem fails, it is often because a single species has become parasitic. It takes all the resources, gives nothing back, and eventually the entire system collapses. It cannot sustain itself." He knew she wasn't just talking about marine biology. That night, he called Mark again. "She's been calling me," Mark said immediately. "Chloe. Wants to know if I've heard from you, if I know what's wrong with you. She said you're refusing to appreciate her creativity." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that marooning your husband is a dick move, not a creative writing exercise, and that if she couldn't see the difference, she needed a therapist, not your forgiveness." Lucas closed his eyes. How did she take that? "About how you'd expect. She called me a boring enabler and hung up." Day 5 brought a revelation in the form of a tearful phone call from his sister Sarah. Sarah, who was tougher than anyone he knew, was crying. "Lucas, I'm so sorry," she choked out. "I should have said something years ago about Chloe.
About the way she treats you. I thought it was just her personality, but this, leaving you there, that's not normal. That's not how you treat someone you love. Sarah unloaded a burden of observations she'd kept silent. How Chloe always scheduled urgent couples activities whenever Sarah was visiting, effectively isolating him. How she'd made subtly cruel comments about Sarah's career, disguised as concern. How, after their father's funeral, Chloe had suggested that Sarah's grief was bringing down the mood and that maybe she should skip the family gathering. "She's been isolating you, Lucas," Sarah said, her voice breaking, "systematically. And I just stood by and watched because I thought you were happy." After that call, Lucas sat in a quiet cafe and made a list, not of sights to see, but of patterns he'd ignored. The spontaneous decisions that always canceled his plans, the helpful suggestions that resulted in him doing more work, the adventures that left him in difficult, expensive, or embarrassing situations while she reaped the entertainment. The midnight escape wasn't an anomaly. It was the logical, terrifying culmination. That evening, at a small gathering at a colleague's apartment, Lucas experienced something novel. Ease. The conversation flowed naturally. People listened. They built on each other's points. They laughed with each other, not at each other's expense. There was no performance, no drama. It was profoundly relaxing. Walking back through the medieval streets of Gamlistan, Annika observed, "You seem different tonight." "How?" "More yourself. Less like you're bracing for impact." He thought about it. "With Chloe, I was always braced for impact." He admitted, "It's exhausting." They stopped outside his hotel. "Lucas," Annika said softly, "my grandmother had a saying. She said some people will set your house on fire just to watch you put it out, and they'll call it entertainment." He looked at her kindness, her steadiness. "What do you do about people like that?" he asked. "You stop giving them matches." His phone buzzed. Another message from Chloe. "I'm getting really worried now. This silent treatment isn't like you." He showed it to Annika. She read it and shook her head. "She is not worried about you," she said with devastating clarity. "She is worried about losing her audience." Standing there in the Stockholm night, Lucas finally understood the fundamental difference between the woman who had abandoned him and the woman who stood beside him. One took for her own amusement, the other gave from a place of genuine kindness. Day 6 was the day Lucas Thorne stopped being a victim of Chloe's narrative and started writing his own. He woke with a resolve he hadn't felt in years. He made a plan based solely on what he wanted.
He wanted to spend the day with Annika. He wanted to see Stockholm through her eyes. He wanted conversations that didn't involve managing someone else's chaos. He met her for breakfast. "Where would you like to go?" she asked. "Somewhere you love," he said. "Not a tourist spot, somewhere that matters to you." Her smile was a gift. They took a ferry to the outer island of Vaxholm. He loved watching her in her element, greeting people who knew her, sharing stories of her childhood summers there. They sat by the water, sharing coffee and cardamom buns. His phone buzzed incessantly. Chloe's messages were becoming unhinged. "You're scaring me. Why are you being like this? Just tell me you're okay. This isn't funny anymore. I don't understand why you're punishing me." "Every message is about her," Annika observed. "Her fear, her frustration, her confusion, even her concern for you is about how your silence makes her feel." That afternoon, visiting a historic fortress, the guide explained its strategic positioning, how it wasn't just strong, but smart about where it placed itself. Lucas thought about his own positioning. For years, he'd accepted the role Chloe had assigned him, the stable, boring foundation for her chaotic brilliance. But here, he was just Lucas, someone interesting, someone worthy of friendship. At dinner, Annika asked him a question that stopped him cold. "What are your dreams, Lucas? Not yours and Chloe's, yours."
He talked about wanting to see the earthquake-resistant architecture in Japan. The engineering is beautiful. They build to flex, not to break. Why haven't you gone? Chloe said Asia was too overwhelming, too crowded. And what do you say? The simplicity of the question was revolutionary. He hadn't been asked for his opinion in so long. I say I want to see how they build things to withstand pressure without shattering. Annika nodded. That sounds like something worth seeing. That night, he made his decision. On the 7th day, exactly 1 week after Chloe's midnight escape, he sent a single text message. Thanks for the extra time here. Annika has been incredibly kind. His phone rang within 30 seconds. Who the hell is Annika? Chloe's voice was a shrill knife edge. A friend? A geologist. She helped me when I was stranded and confused after my wife abandoned me in a foreign country. I didn't abandon you. Don't be so dramatic. It was a joke. You have money. You're a big boy. Explain the joke to me, Chloe. Walk me through it. What's the punchline? You always overthink everything. I was trying to force you to be spontaneous. You're right, he said calmly, walking through the city to meet Annika. I'm not helpless. I figured that out this week. Good, so you can come home and we can laugh about this whole silly thing. Actually, he said, his voice steady and clear, I've been thinking about what kind of person finds this kind of cruelty entertaining. I'm considering staying in Sweden for a while. Maybe a long while. The silence on the other end was absolute. Then a torrent of words. Lucas, you're being insane. You can't throw away our marriage over some Swedish slut you just met. I was trying to help you. You thought wrong, he said quietly, and he ended the call. The barrage that followed was epic. 51 desperate calls over the next month. He answered only one 3 weeks later when she was sobbing so hysterically he could barely understand her. Everyone thinks I'm a monster, she wailed. Sarah won't speak to me. Mark told everyone what I did. My own friends are looking at me differently. What did you expect would happen? I expected my wife to act like she loved me, he said, his voice cold and flat. What did you expect would happen when people found out you sneaked out of a hotel at 3 a.m. to abandon your husband? Did you think they'd applaud your creativity? They're not laughing, Chloe, because it wasn't funny. It was cruel. And now everyone can see it. He stayed in Stockholm for 2 more months. His friendship with Annika deepened into a respectful, tender partnership built on mutual interest and quiet reliability. She showed him her Sweden, and he showed her what it was like to be with someone who kept his promises. The divorce was swift. The documented evidence of Chloe's abandonment made it a straightforward case of constructive abandonment. Her own lawyer advised her not to contest it. By the time Lucas returned to Portland to collect his belongings, Chloe's reputation had undergone a seismic shift. The woman once admired for her zest for life was now privately called unhinged and cruel. The story of the midnight escape spread through their social circle and into her interior design firm, where clients began to question the judgment of someone who would do such a thing. Trust, once broken, proved impossible to repair. 6 months later, Lucas stood on the deck of a research vessel off the coast of Greenland, consulting on the structural integrity of their new Arctic drilling equipment. The midnight sun cast a soft, eternal glow over the icebergs. Annika stood beside him, her hand in his.
Chloe's vicious prank, designed to humiliate and control him, had backfired catastrophically. In her attempt to prove her power over him, she had inadvertently given him the push he needed to escape her gravitational pull. She had set his old life on fire, and from the ashes, he had built something new, something strong, something authentic. He had learned to bend without breaking, and he had found a love that was not a raging fire, but a steady, enduring warmth.